This morning, a new document coming to light claims in the mid-2000s, President Trump called police about Jeffrey Epstein. Among the 3 million Epstein files released by the Department of Justice last month is a 4-page FBI report on an interview the Bureau conducted in 2019 with the man believed to be former Palm Beach Police Chief Michael Ryder. Ryder and his detectives began investigating Epstein for human trafficking in 2004. According to the document, Trump called Ryder around that time and said, "Thank goodness you're stopping him. Everyone has known he's been doing this." Ryder also says Trump said he threw Epstein out of his club, and he was around Epstein once when teenagers were present, and Trump got the hell out of there. The former police chief says Trump told him to focus on Epstein's associate Ghislaine Maxwell, saying she is evil.
The dirt, the stench, the shadow that won't lift. In 2026, the United States government released millions of pages of Jeffrey Epstein documents, and somehow the victims were exposed while the powerful stayed hidden. This isn't about conspiracy theories. This is about what actually happened when the Department of Justice finally unsealed the files everyone said would never see daylight, what they revealed, what they concealed, and who decided which names the public would never know. Welcome back. What you're about to hear isn't speculation. It's drawn from congressional testimony, official depositions, and the documents themselves. From diplomats resigning in disgrace to royalty caught forwarding state secrets. From survivors demanding answers to redactions that protect the guilty more than the innocent. This is the 2026 Epstein file release, and it's bigger and darker than anyone prepared for.
Did you have any suspicions that he was molesting young women,
No, I had
underage
no
women?
idea. I had no idea.
Trump has long denied having any knowledge of Epstein's crimes, but Ryder says Trump was one of the very first people to call when people found out that they were investigating Epstein.
Let's start with the woman who was supposed to break everything wide open. Ghislaine Maxwell. Convicted in 2021 for her role in Epstein's trafficking network, she sat at the center of it all. She knew the names, she knew the operations, she knew who funded it, who enabled it, who participated. When Congress finally got her in front of them in 2026 via video link from federal prison, lawmakers had one goal: get the names, get the structure, get the co-conspirators. The House Oversight and Government Reform Committee had spent months preparing. They had millions of newly released documents showing transfers, communications, logistics. They had gaps only Maxwell could fill. This was the moment, and she gave them nothing. Not a word, not a name, not a detail. Fifth Amendment, over and over, self-incrimination, silence. The one person who could connect the dots, who could identify the network that spanned continents, who could confirm which public figures were involved and how deep it went, refused to speak. One lawmaker described it as watching the key to a vault refuse to turn. Maxwell sat there on screen and let the questions hang in the air unanswered. This wasn't just frustrating, it was strategic, because every question she refused to answer protected someone else. Every invocation of her Fifth Amendment right was a shield for people whose names are still redacted in those files. The silence wasn't just hers, it was theirs. While Maxwell stayed quiet, the documents started screaming, and the loudest revelation involved someone the world already suspected but couldn't prove: Prince Andrew, the younger brother of King Charles, former trade envoy for the United Kingdom, already embroiled in scandal from his association with Epstein. The 2026 files didn't just show he knew Epstein, they showed he was feeding him official British government intelligence. November 30th, 2010. Prince Andrew receives confidential reports from his office summarizing his official visits as a UK trade envoy to Vietnam, Singapore, and China. 5 minutes later, he forwards them to Jeffrey Epstein. 5 minutes. This wasn't a casual update to a friend. These were official government briefs, confidential assessments of trade opportunities, internal summaries meant for British officials, not American financiers under federal investigation. The emails show Andrew sending Epstein detailed information about investment opportunities in Afghanistan's Helmand province, a war zone where British forces were actively deployed. He forwarded reports on trips to Hong Kong. He looped Epstein into conversations about reconstruction contracts, economic strategy, diplomatic priorities. Why? What was Epstein doing with British state intelligence? What was he offering in return? The documents don't say, but the pattern is unmistakable. Epstein wasn't just socially connected to power, he was operationally embedded in it. UK authorities are now reviewing whether this constitutes a breach of confidentiality or misconduct in public office. But the damage to the monarchy is already done. Prince William and Princess Catherine, who almost never comment on family scandals, issued a rare public statement saying they are deeply concerned and that their thoughts remain with the victims. That's as close as the modern royal family gets to a public rebuke. King Charles has reportedly forced Andrew out of his residence near Windsor Castle. The message is clear: the monarchy is trying to survive this by cutting Andrew loose. But the question lingers: If a prince was sharing state secrets with Epstein, who else was? Now let's talk about what's inside the room where it happens. Congressman Jamie Raskin and other members of the House Judiciary Committee were granted access to the unredacted files. Not summaries, not press releases, the actual documents in full without the black bars. They were taken to what Raskin described as a desolate facility with just 4 computers to review millions of pages. The process was painstaking, time-consuming, and according to Raskin, it revealed something deeply disturbing. The redactions weren't protecting the victims, they were protecting the accused. Here's what he found. Hundreds of pages where the names of survivors, their identifying details, their testimonies were left completely unredacted in the public release. Victims whose privacy was supposed to be sacred were exposed. Meanwhile, the names of alleged co-conspirators, enablers, financiers, and abusers were blacked out to spare them embarrassment or avoid political sensitivity. Raskin called some of these redactions mysterious and baffling. In one instance, the name of billionaire Les Wexner, who had already been publicly linked to Epstein and other records, was redacted from a government document for no clear reason. Why hide a name that's already known, unless the document revealed something new, something worse? The redactions weren't random. They followed a pattern: protect the powerful, expose the powerless. Raskin pointed to one specific example that lit up political circles. An email Epstein sent to Ghislaine Maxwell, forwarding a message from his lawyers summarizing a conversation with Donald Trump's legal team during a 2009 investigation. In that email, Trump is quoted as saying Epstein was not a member of Mar-a-Lago, but was a guest there and had never been asked to leave. That detail was redacted in the public version. Why? Raskin called it an indeterminate, inscrutable decision. But here's the problem. That statement appears to contradict more recent claims from Trump suggesting he had banned Epstein from the club. If the email is accurate, it raises questions about the timeline, the relationship, and why that specific clarification was deemed too sensitive for public view. Raskin was asked if there were similar redactions protecting the Clintons. He said he saw none in the documents he reviewed. That's important, not because it clears anyone, but because it shows the redactions weren't applied evenly. Some names were protected, others weren't. The decision of who gets privacy and who gets exposure wasn't based on legal necessity. It was based on something else. This scandal isn't contained to American or British shores. It reached all the way to Norway. Mona Juul, a veteran diplomat serving as Norway's ambassador to Jordan and Iraq, was forced to resign. The reason? Her past contacts with Jeffrey Epstein came under intense scrutiny when the 2026 files were released. Reports emerged that Epstein had left money to her family in his will. Norway's foreign minister didn't mince words. He called her departure necessary, citing a serious lapse in judgment that damaged the trust required for her position. Authorities are now investigating whether Juul received other improper benefits during her career. And in the United Kingdom, it's not just Prince Andrew. Prime Minister Keir Starmer is reportedly facing intense pressure over mentions in the files. The details haven't been fully disclosed, but the political fallout is real. Across countries, across decades, the same pattern emerges. Contact with Epstein didn't just mean association. It meant leverage. It meant vulnerability. It meant risk. And in 2026, that risk became public. Not everyone named in the files is accused of a crime, but even innocent association is forcing people to explain themselves. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. appeared in emails from 2012 referencing a dinosaur and fossil hunting trip in the Dakotas. The emails were between Epstein and Maxwell. RFK Jr. has since confirmed he joined the trip with his family, calling it an innocent fossil excursion. He emphasized he had no knowledge of Epstein's crimes at the time and has not been accused of any wrongdoing. But his name is in the files, and in 2026, that's enough to require a public statement. Then there's Tony Hawk, skateboarding legend, cultural icon. After his name surfaced in the documents, rumors exploded online claiming he had been married on Epstein's private island. Hawk took to Instagram to shut it down. He clarified that a photographer at his 2006 wedding in Fiji was named Mark Epstein, who has zero relation to Jeffrey Epstein. Hawk emphasized he has never met the disgraced financier and called the narrative complete nonsense. It's a reminder of how association, even by coincidence, can become accusation in the digital age, guilt by proximity, suspicion by implication. And once your name appears in those files, the burden of proof shifts to you. But here's what the documents also reveal, something that goes beyond individual names. They expose the machinery, the logistics of how a trafficking network this massive could operate for decades without being stopped. Flight logs show hundreds of trips on Epstein's private jets. Financial records trace millions moving through shell companies, offshore accounts, and foundations. Communications reveal a calendar system where young women were scheduled, transported, and delivered like appointments. This wasn't opportunistic, it was industrial. The files show Epstein had assistants whose job was to coordinate travel. He had pilots who flew routes connecting his properties in New York, Florida, New Mexico, Paris, and the Caribbean. He had staff at each location. He had lawyers on retainer ready to threaten anyone who asked questions, and he had contacts, powerful contacts, who opened doors, made introductions, and provided cover. The network didn't collapse when Epstein was arrested in 2019. It didn't even collapse when he died, because the network was never just about him. It was about the ecosystem that sustained him, an ecosystem that includes people whose names are still redacted, people who are still working, still influential, still protected. The financial documents are especially revealing. Epstein's wealth has always been a mystery. He claimed to manage money for billionaires, but evidence of actual clients was always scarce. The 2026 files shed light on where some of that money came from and where it went. Transfers to offshore accounts in the British Virgin Islands, payments to shell companies with no clear purpose, large sums moving to individuals whose names are redacted but whose roles are described as consultants, advisors, or associates. One document shows a payment of over $2 million to an entity described only as a legal defense fund. Another shows regular transfers to what's labeled as a philanthropic foundation, though investigators found no evidence of charitable work. The money wasn't just for Epstein's lifestyle, it was for infrastructure, for silence, for leverage, because money in the right hands buys more than luxury. It buys loyalty, it buys discretion, and in Epstein's case, it bought time. Years and years of time while authorities looked the other way. Let's talk about that, the role of law enforcement in this story. Because one of the most damning aspects of the 2026 release isn't what Epstein did, it's what officials knew and didn't do. In 2008, Epstein was given a sweetheart plea deal by federal prosecutors in Florida. Despite evidence of abuse involving dozens of minors, he pleaded guilty to 2 state charges, served 13 months in a county jail with work release privileges, and was required to register as a sex offender. That deal was orchestrated by then U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, who later resigned as Secretary of Labor when the details resurfaced. The 2026 documents show the deal was even worse than previously known. Emails between prosecutors reveal they were aware of the scope of Epstein's operation. They knew about the international travel. They knew about the network of recruiters. They knew about victims who were as young as 14. And they chose not to pursue federal charges that could have put Epstein away for life. Why? Some emails reference Epstein's connections. Others mention concerns about embarrassing important people. One prosecutor wrote that pursuing the case aggressively could open a can of worms that would be difficult to manage. Manage for whom? That's the question survivors are asking, because it's clear now that the goal wasn't justice. It was containment. Keep the case quiet, protect the names, let Epstein take a minimal hit and move on. And it worked, until it didn't. When Epstein was arrested again in 2019, this time by federal authorities in New York, it seemed like the containment had failed. He was charged with sex trafficking of minors and conspiracy. The case was building. Victims were prepared to testify. And then Epstein died in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. The official ruling was suicide, but the circumstances raised immediate questions. Epstein was on suicide watch, then removed. Cameras outside his cell malfunctioned. Guards assigned to check on him fell asleep. The autopsy showed injuries some experts said were more consistent with strangulation than hanging. The 2026 files don't resolve those questions, but they add context. They show that in the weeks before his death, Epstein was receiving calls from multiple high-profile attorneys. He was drafting new financial documents. He was moving assets. One email, sent just days before he died, references a conversation about exposure and damage control. Another mentions the need to protect certain individuals if things go public. Whether Epstein took his own life or was killed, one thing is certain. His death ensured he would never testify, never name names, never detail the full scope of what he built. And for some people, that was convenient. While politicians deflect and celebrities clarify, the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein are demanding something the government seems unwilling to give: the full truth. During the 2026 Super Bowl, a powerful public service announcement aired. Multiple victims stood together, black bars over their mouths, silent but present. The message was direct. This girl deserves the truth. We all deserve the truth. They weren't asking for justice in the abstract. They were demanding the release of the remaining 3 million government files still being withheld or heavily redacted by the Department of Justice. The incomplete rollout, as survivors described it, obscures the reality of Epstein's network. It protects those who enabled, financed, and participated in a billion-dollar international sex trafficking operation. The survivors aren't buying the DOJ's excuses about ongoing investigations or protecting privacy. They see the pattern everyone sees: victims exposed, enablers hidden, and they're calling it what it is: a cover-up, not a conspiracy theory, a documented ongoing decision to keep certain names out of public view while letting others burn. They're urging Attorney General Pam Bondi to disclose everything. They're asking Congress to hold hearings. They're refusing to let this story fade. Because for them, this isn't politics. It's their lives. The question everyone's asking now is simple. What happens next? All eyes are on Attorney General Pam Bondi's upcoming testimony before the House Judiciary Committee. Lawmakers want answers. Why were victims' names left unredacted while co-conspirators were protected? Why were certain politically sensitive details blacked out with no clear legal justification? Why are 3 million documents still being withheld when the Epstein Files Transparency Act was supposed to ensure full disclosure? Bondi will have to answer under oath, and her answers, or her refusal to answer, will determine whether this story ends or explodes. Because here's what we know for certain. A billion-dollar sex trafficking network spanning multiple countries and decades wasn't run by two people. Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell didn't build this alone. There were financiers, there were facilitators, there were clients, there were protectors in law enforcement, in government, in media, in business. The documents prove it, the redactions confirm it, and the silence from those who know the full story is deafening. Jamie Raskin put it plainly. We need to investigate the money. We need to map the organizational hierarchy. We need to identify the co-conspirators who have been hidden behind black ink for far too long. This isn't about partisan politics. Democrats and Republicans alike are mentioned in these files. This isn't about one country. The network was international. This is about power, about who gets protected and who gets exposed, about whether the rule of law applies equally or whether wealth and influence can still buy silence even after death. We are only seeing a fraction of the story. The 2026 release was supposed to be the moment of transparency. Instead, it revealed how much is still hidden. 3 million documents, 3 million pages that could name names, trace money, expose structures, 3 million files that someone somewhere decided the public shouldn't see. Who made that call? What are they protecting? And how long will they be allowed to protect it? The revelations we've discussed today, the resignations, the royal scandals, the redaction patterns, the survivor testimonies, these might just be the tip of the iceberg. What's beneath the surface is still out of view. But the pressure is building. Congress is demanding answers. Survivors are demanding justice. The public is demanding truth. And every day that passes with those files still sealed, the questions get louder. If 3 million files are still hidden, who decided they shouldn't be seen? That's the question that should keep everyone uncomfortable, because the answer isn't about national security or protecting investigations. The answer is about power, about control, about who gets to decide what the public knows and when they know it. And right now, those decisions are being made by people who might have their own names to protect. This story isn't over. The 2026 Epstein file release was supposed to close the book. Instead, it opened new chapters. Chapters that implicate governments, royal families, diplomats, billionaires, and institutions that have spent years insisting they had no idea what Epstein was doing. The documents prove otherwise. The emails prove contact, the financial records prove transactions, the travel logs prove presence, and the redactions prove someone is still working very hard to keep certain truths from coming out. So what do you believe? Are the redactions a legitimate legal necessity to protect ongoing cases and privacy rights? Or are they a coordinated effort to shield the powerful from accountability while throwing lower-level enablers and victims into the spotlight? The evidence points in one direction, but the decision is yours. Before we close, one quick clarification. Everything in this video is based on public information, historical context, and my own analysis. It's not a call to action, not an instruction, and not a claim about anyone's intentions. It's simply one perspective on a fast-changing situation. Reasonable people can see the same facts and reach different conclusions, and that's healthy. No matter where you stand, the goal should always be the same: stability, accountability, and peace, without fear or hate. You're welcome to share your own perspective in the comments, respectfully and thoughtfully. Thank you for watching and for thinking critically. Subscribe for more calm, fact-driven deep dives.